I still remember that cold Christmas night in Mapleford, America, as clearly as if it happened just yesterday. The snow outside had fallen in soft layers, covering the sidewalks and rooftops until everything looked like a quiet white painting. Inside our house on Winterhill Lane, warm yellow lights glowed from every window, making the place look cheerful from the outside, almost magical, like a postcard someone might send from a winter trip. But deep inside, behind the laughter and the holiday decorations, there was a weight in the air that only I seemed to feel. It was the kind of weight that sits in your chest and tells you something bad is coming, even before anyone says a word. Our house was filled with people, neighbors, distant relatives, co-workers of my parents whom I barely knew. They were drinking, talking loudly, and pretending everything was perfect. I stood beside the Christmas tree, holding a cup of warm chocolate, letting the steam brush against my face. The tree was tall and elegant, decorated with red ribbons and tiny white lights that blinked softly. I loved looking at it, even though I felt like a shadow in the room. I kept hoping my parents would come over and say something nice to me, even something small, "Merry Christmas, Sarah." But they stayed far away, laughing with guests and holding their glasses of expensive wine like they were the king and queen of the evening. I was used to being ignored, but that night the silence felt sharp. I watched the way my mother, Evelyn, smiled at everyone except me, and the way my father, Grant, walked around the room like a man showing off a trophy he didn't earn. Every time their eyes crossed mine, they quickly looked away, as if I didn't exist. I tried to tell myself that maybe they were just busy hosting, that maybe they would come to me later. But a quiet voice inside me whispered that they wouldn't. It whispered that they never did. After about an hour, my mother clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. She always loved being the center of every room, and the guests turned to her with polite smiles. My father stood beside her, his posture stiff, his jaw tight like he was preparing for something. I felt a strange chill run through me. I didn't know what they were going to say, but I could feel the shift in the air, the way people suddenly waited, the way the room seemed to pause. Then they said it. "We want to make an announcement," my mother said, her voice smooth and calm, as if she were talking about dinner plans. "Grant and I are getting divorced. We've decided it's the best thing for both of us." A few people gasped softly. Some glanced around awkwardly. But no one expected what came next. My father pointed directly at me. His hand didn't shake. His face didn't soften. "And we have nothing to do with this girl anymore," he said. "She's a burden we can't take." The words hit me so hard I felt the ground tilt. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at him, waiting for him to say he didn't mean it. Waiting for my mother to step in and correct him. Waiting for someone, anyone, to stop this terrible moment from happening. But no one did. My mother nodded like she was agreeing with a boring conversation. "We've tried for years," she said. "We simply can't keep her." The room went silent. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Some shocked, some embarrassed for me, some pretending not to care. My throat tightened, and before I could stop myself, tears began sliding down my cheeks. I wasn't just crying because they said those words. I cried because a part of me had always known they were true to them. I cried because the one hope I still held, that someday they might love me, finally broke. I thought I was alone. I thought no one would come to me or wrap their arms around me or tell me that my parents were wrong. But then a warm, steady arm wrapped around my shoulders, pulling me close. It was my Uncle Harrison. He was my father's older brother, quieter and kinder than anyone else in the family. People barely noticed him at gatherings because he didn't try to show off or impress anyone. That might be why I always liked him. He didn't pretend. But I had never seen him like this. He stepped forward, placing himself between me and my parents like a shield. His eyes burned with anger I had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice shook the entire room. "From now on," he said loudly, "this is my daughter." Gasps echoed across the room. Even the Christmas music seemed to shrink into the background. Then he turned to my parents, his expression cold and full of disgust. "And you too," he growled. "Get out of my house." My parents froze. For the first time in their lives, they looked small. My mother blinked at him with disbelief, while my father tried to laugh it off. "Harrison," my father said, forcing a smile. "You're being dramatic. We weren't serious." "Yes, it was just a joke," my mother added quickly, stepping forward as if she could charm him. But Uncle Harrison didn't move. He didn't soften. He didn't let go of me. "You don't get to call it a joke," he said. "Not after you humiliated your own child in front of a room full of people. Not after years of treating her like she doesn't matter." My parents looked around the room, searching for support, but no one dared to speak. No one wanted to stand against Harrison, not with the way he looked in that moment, strong, certain, unshakable. When they realized no one would help them, they finally lowered their heads and walked out. My father didn't look back. My mother did, but only for a second, and her face showed annoyance rather than regret. The door closed behind them, and the house felt strangely quiet. I cried harder then, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in my life, someone had chosen me. Someone had stood up for me. Someone had called me daughter with pride. Uncle Harrison tightened his arm around me and whispered, "You're safe now, Sarah. I've got you." And that night, for the first time in years, someone held me like I mattered. The morning after the Christmas party felt strangely quiet, as if the entire world was holding its breath. I woke up in my uncle's guest room, wrapped in a thick navy blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and old books. For a moment, I lay still, unsure whether the night before had really happened or if it had been some sort of dream, one of those dreams that start as nightmares but end with a hand reaching out to save you. But when I heard soft footsteps outside my door and remembered the sound of my parents being pushed out into the snow, the truth settled over me like a heavy coat. It had all been real. I walked downstairs slowly, my heart beating too fast for someone who had just woken up. Uncle Harrison was sitting in the living room near the stone fireplace, the warm light flickering against his face. He wasn't dressed like a billionaire. He wasn't even dressed like someone who had slept. His brown sweater was slightly wrinkled, and his hair looked as if he had run his hands through it too many times. But when he saw me, his expression softened in a way I had never seen from anyone in my family. "Good morning, Sarah," he said gently. "Come sit with me." I sat down on the couch across from him, hugging my knees. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence. I wondered if he regretted what he had done, if he felt guilty for standing against my parents so publicly. I wondered if he would send me back to them now that the anger had cooled. But instead, he leaned forward and said something that changed everything. "I have something to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago." His voice was calm, almost too calm, and it made me tense. People in my life didn't usually start sentences like that unless it meant something bad. I prepared myself for disappointment, but the words that came next were not what I imagined. "Sarah, I am not the man people think I am." I frowned slightly, confused. He gave a small, tired smile and continued. "Everyone believes I am poor, that I have lived a simple life because I had no choice. But that isn't true. I chose this life. I chose the old coat, the quiet house, the plain meals. I chose to let the world think I had little." I blinked at him, unable to speak. The idea of choosing poverty was something I had never heard before. But why? I finally whispered. He looked into the fire, his eyes distant. "Because, Sarah, money makes people forget who they are. It twists their voices, changes their hearts. When you have money, people respect your wallet, not your soul. They pretend to care because they want something from you. But when you have nothing, when they think you have nothing, that is when their true nature shows." The words struck me with surprising force. I thought of my parents, of the guests who suddenly avoided looking at me after the announcement, of all the ways people in my life had shifted depending on who was watching. "I wanted to live in a way that revealed people," he continued. "So, I hid everything. Every dollar. Every company. Every connection. I buried my real life so deep that even your parents never knew the truth." I swallowed hard. What truth? He finally turned toward me, and his expression was quiet but powerful. "Sarah, I am a billionaire." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh or correct himself. But he didn't. He simply watched me with the eyes of someone who had carried a heavy secret for far too long. I own a company in Rivershire, America, called Northcrest Innovations, he said. It is one of the most successful technology companies in the country. But my name is not on the company. I use a private code, and only a few trusted managers know who really runs it. I felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt. My uncle, the man who wore patched jackets, who drove an old truck with a cracked mirror, who cooked simple meals in a tiny kitchen, owned a technology empire worth billions of dollars? It didn't seem possible. Why tell me this? I whispered. Because last night changed more than you realize, he said softly. Your parents crossed a line they can never step back from. And I will not allow you to return to a home where you are treated like a burden. You deserve better than what they gave you. Much better. His voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from emotion. I had never seen a grown man speak like that, not for me, not for anyone. And suddenly, the truth didn't feel like a story. It felt like a door opening, one I never knew existed. He leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire again. I kept my wealth hidden for decades. Not because I enjoy pretending to be poor, but because I wanted to stay free from the hands that grab and the voices that flatter. I have seen how greed changes people. That is why I lived quietly in Mapleford, letting others underestimate me. A memory flashed in my mind, the way neighbors sometimes mocked him, calling him old-fashioned or strange. I remembered kids whispering that he was the poor uncle. I remembered how he never defended himself. He just smiled and let them think what they wanted. Now I understood why. Does anyone else know? I asked. No, he said. No one except my managers and my lawyers in Rivershire. Even they don't fully understand how much I own. I structured everything to keep myself invisible. I shook my head slowly. So all this time, you were protecting yourself? And now, he said quietly, I am protecting you. Something warm spread through my chest, something strong and new. For the first time in my life, someone wasn't treating me as a mistake or a problem. Someone was choosing me, openly and without hesitation. He looked at me with a gentle seriousness. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Last night wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. I will take care of you. I will give you a home, a future, and a life where you are respected. But more important than all of that, I will make sure you never feel unwanted again. Tears filled my eyes, but these tears were different from the ones I cried the night before. They weren't tears of pain. They were tears of hope. I nodded slowly, still overwhelmed, but no longer afraid. And as the fire crackled softly between us, I realized that my story was changing, not because of the money, not because of the secrets, but because for the first time in my life, I had someone who truly saw me. Someone who chose me. Someone who believed I deserved better. I didn't know what the next chapter of my life would look like, but I felt something new rising quietly inside me, something like strength. And it began with the truth about my uncle. 1 week after the Christmas night that changed everything, my uncle woke me early in the morning. The winter sun had barely risen, and thin light crept through the curtains of the guest room where I now slept. I rubbed my eyes and sat up slowly, still not used to the feeling of safety in this house. For the first time in my life, mornings did not fill me with fear. They felt open, quiet, and almost gentle. When I walked downstairs, my uncle was already waiting for me near the front door, wearing one of his simple gray coats. He looked calm, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that made me wonder what the day would bring. Get dressed, Sarah, he said softly. I'm taking you somewhere important. I changed quickly and joined him outside. The air was sharp with winter cold, and our breath rose like pale smoke as we walked toward his old truck. It always amazed me that a man who secretly owned billions of dollars still drove something so plain. But today I would learn why he chose to live the way he did. We drove out of Mapleford and headed toward Rivershire, a city known for factories, business centers, and the kind of buildings where people made decisions that shaped the world. As we entered the city, tall structures rose around us like silent giants. My uncle's hands stayed steady on the wheel, but I sensed a shift in him as the buildings grew higher. It was as if he were stepping back into a life he had kept hidden for too long. We turned onto a quiet street where an old brick factory stood. The windows were dark, and the outside looked abandoned, as if no one had touched it in years. I frowned, wondering why he brought me to such a place.
"This is it," he said.
I stared at him, confused. "Your company is here?" He smiled faintly. "On the outside, yes. On the inside, you'll see." When we stepped through the rusted door, the world changed. The old exterior had been a mask. Behind it was a stunning interior, a world of bright white marble floors, polished metal rails, and glass walls that reflected the light like water. Tall screens displayed maps, numbers, charts, and images of innovation. People in suits moved quickly through the halls, speaking into headsets or holding tablets. The energy in this place felt alive, powerful, like standing at the heart of something too large to fully understand. And then I noticed something else, the way people reacted to my uncle. Every person who saw him stopped mid-step. They straightened their backs, nodded with deep respect, and some even lowered their heads slightly as they passed. A woman with dark hair walked by and said, "Good morning, sir." A man carrying documents stepped aside quickly and whispered, "The owner is here." Owner. That word hit me like a small shock. I looked up at my uncle. They respect you." He nodded, though there was sadness in his eyes. "They respect the owner, Sarah. Not the man who walks around Mapleford wearing an old coat. Respect is easy when people believe you are powerful." The truth in his voice hurt in a quiet way. I understood what he meant far too well. He placed a hand on my shoulder.
"Come.
There's more I want you to see." We walked down a long hallway until we reached a room with glass doors. Inside, 3 people waited at a long table, a woman with short blonde hair, a tall man with sharp features, and another woman wearing glasses and a warm smile. They all stood as we entered. "Sarah," my uncle said, "these are my lawyers, Janet Collins, Harper Miles, and Leonard Pierce." They greeted me politely, their voices formal but kind. In front of them sat a stack of papers, thick, heavy, and layered with meaning I didn't yet understand. My uncle pulled out a chair for me and sat beside me. His face softened, and he looked at me with a mixture of pride and sadness. "This is the day everything changes for you," he said quietly. My heart thumped hard.
"Why?"
He motioned toward the papers. "Because these documents transfer all of my assets to you. Every property I own in America. My apartment in Elmbrook, Europe. My accounts. My shares in this company. All of it." I stared at him as if I had misheard. All of it? But why would you do that?" He placed his hand gently on mine. "Because you've lived too long without love, and I refuse to watch you walk through life unprotected. You deserve a future where you stand strong, where no one can treat you as your parents did. You deserve a chance to rewrite your story." My throat tightened. Tears gathered, but I blinked them away. "Uncle, this is too much." He shook his head. "It's exactly right. You are the only person in my life who has never wanted anything for me. You saw me as a person, not a wallet. You are my family, Sarah. And I want you to have everything I could never give to myself." Before I could answer, the glass doors slammed open. My parents rushed into the room. My mother, Evelyn, cried loudly the moment she saw me. "Sarah, sweetheart. Thank goodness we found you. We're so sorry. We didn't mean anything we said. We were stressed. Yes, stressed. Please come home." My father stepped forward quickly, nodding like a puppet. Yes, come with us. We love you, Sarah. Truly." I froze. Their voices sounded sweet, almost desperate, but something in their eyes felt hollow.
"Forced. Wrong."
My uncle stood between us before I could speak. "You apologized only when you learned she is about to receive over $4.8 billion in assets." My parents stiffened. Their eyes flicked toward the papers on the table, glimmering with hunger. "This isn't about money," my mother protested weakly. "This is about family," my father added. "No." my uncle said sharply. If it were about family, you would have acted like parents before you humiliated her. You don't get to return now that her value has risen in your eyes. My mother's mouth twisted. You can't keep her from us. I already have, he replied. He snapped his fingers, and 2 security guards entered. They stepped toward my parents, firm but polite. No, my mother shouted. This is ridiculous, my father barked. But neither of them fought. They were escorted out of the room, their pride melting into anger and frustration. The door closed behind them, leaving a deep silence. My uncle turned to me. You don't owe them anything, he said softly. I looked at the papers, the future they held, the protection, the love, the trust, and then I looked at the man who had become my family. With steady hands, I picked up the pen. I signed every page. And as the final stroke of ink dried, I felt the weight of my old life fall away, piece by piece. I was no longer the unwanted girl crying at a Christmas party. I was someone new, someone chosen, someone with a future. And all of it began on the day my life changed forever. Moving into the quiet white house on Willowbrook Street felt like stepping into a different world, one I never believed I would ever be allowed to enter. The house stood at the end of a curved road lined with tall, evergreen trees, their branches brushing the winter air like soft hands. The walls of the house were bright, almost glowing under the morning sun, and the wide porch wrapped around the front like open arms waiting to welcome me. When I first walked through the front door, my hands were shaking. I didn't know whether I was walking into a temporary moment of kindness or the beginning of a true life. But as I explored the rooms, each one warm, clean, and filled with softness, I realized this was real. I was home. My bedroom was upstairs, painted a pale cream color, with a large window that overlooked the garden. The bed was covered in a white quilt, thick and warm, with light blue pillows that reminded me of the winter sky. For the first time in my life, I had a room that wasn't used for storage, a room that didn't feel like an afterthought. It was mine. My space to breathe, to think, to dream. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself cry, not from sadness, but from relief. After so many years of feeling invisible, I finally had a place where I belonged. Even though my life had changed overnight, I refused to let the money define me. I still cooked simple meals, the same ones I used to make when my parents forgot to feed me. I woke up early, walked through the small park nearby, and let the cold air clear my mind. I even shopped at the same grocery stores as before, smiling politely at people who didn't know who I now was, who didn't know that I had access to more dollars than they might see in a lifetime. None of that mattered to me. What mattered was the quiet safety I felt every morning when I woke up in that house. Of course, the memories of the Christmas party still found me sometimes. They came back suddenly when I least expected them, while stirring a pot of soup, while tying my shoes, while brushing my hair. I would hear my father's voice telling everyone I was a burden, feel my mother's cold agreement echoing in my chest, and my heart would ache all over again. But each time the pain rose up, my Uncle Harrison would remind me I wasn't alone. He never pushed me to forget. Instead, he sat with me in silence or handed me a warm cup of tea, giving me the space to feel everything without shame. In time, our bond grew stronger than I ever imagined. He became more than an uncle. He became the family I had always wished for, but never thought I would receive. He was patient, gentle, and wise, and he understood things without needing explanations. If I seemed quiet, he didn't force conversation. If I looked tired, he didn't ask why. He simply existed beside me like a steady light that never dimmed. And as the days passed, I began to trust that his care wasn't temporary, wasn't conditional, wasn't going to disappear the moment I made a mistake. A few months after I moved in, he suggested we travel, not for business, not for show, but simply to live. We visited small towns in America first, places with names like Silver Pine and Brookshore, places filled with peaceful lakes and friendly strangers who didn't know anything about our lives. We walked through farmers' markets, tried homemade pies, listened to street musicians, and talked about everything and nothing. Each moment felt like a piece of the childhood I never had, gently returned to me in the form of quiet memories. Then one spring morning, he said, "Sarah, there is a world beyond America that I want you to see." And just like that, we were flying to Europe, where the air carried a different kind of history, and every street seemed to hold a story of its own. One of my favorite places we visited was Brightford, a small European town with cobblestone streets and colorful houses that looked like they belonged in a painting. The town square was gentle and calm, with a fountain in the middle and old brick cafes that smelled of fresh bread and roasted coffee. We sat near the fountain one evening, the sun setting behind the rooftops, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. Tourists walked by us, laughing and taking pictures, but somehow the world felt quiet around us. That was when my uncle turned to me, his eyes reflecting the warm colors of the evening. "Sarah," he said softly, "you are not the burden. You are the blessing." The words hit me with a warmth I wasn't prepared for. My throat tightened, and tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. All my life, I had been treated as something heavy, something unwanted, something that ruined everything it touched. Hearing the opposite from the one person who had saved me felt like the sun rising inside my chest. I reached for his hand and held it tightly. "And you," I whispered, "are the reason I survived." He didn't respond right away. He just squeezed my hand gently, letting the truth settle between us like a promise. In that moment, I knew our bond wasn't made of money or obligation. It was made of choice, his choice to protect me, and my choice to trust him. When we returned to America, life began to shape itself into something steady and real. I started studying business and leadership, not because I wanted power, but because my uncle believed I had the mind for it. He wanted me to understand the world I was stepping into, the world of ownership, responsibility, and legacy. He reminded me often that wealth wasn't a prize but a tool, one that could either destroy or build, depending on the heart that held it. I tried my best to honor his faith in me, and as time passed, I realized that the girl who once stood crying beside a Christmas tree had become someone stronger. Someone capable of standing tall even in the face of pain. Someone worthy of love, respect, and a future. I am Sarah.
This is my story.
And this new life, is only the beginning.